to give to other people to do business with Blender. But there was also the case when Cookie released a commercial add-on, which was, oh my God, you had to pay for software for Blender. That was, of course, evil, you know. That shouldn't be possible, even though they released it as a CPL piece of software. And then we had the Octane team releasing a Blender version, even closer. Yeah? So they were releasing a Blender version which was using some kind of API to talk to their closed rendering system, Octane. And even people like from V-Ray and Arnold Render contacted us because they were interested in hooking up the commercial software into Blender, and they wanted to find out how to do that or how we would feel about that. So that's a little bit the topic we want to talk about, also about for companies who do services with Blender, like render, farm support. So I would like to ask you guys first to say a little bit about what your experience with Blender business was, or commercializing, or what kind of statement you might make for the future.
Well, I guess I'll start. So my name is Jonathan Williamson. I run blendercookies.com, or in this case, the company would be CG Cookie. As far as the commercial aspect goes, basically there's two facets to it. One is basically we offer commercial training, where we have a membership program that you can subscribe to and get access to exclusive, tutorial series and things like that. So rather than buying, say, a DVD, you would subscribe, and then everything we release you get. So that's one facet. Then the other facet is the thing that Ton mentioned, where earlier this year we released an add-on for Blender for doing retopology that we then sold the add-on but released it under GPL. So it's a open source tool that then we are selling.
Hello, I'm Marius. I'm the CEO of Rendicity. We do rendering online for Blender, and basically we support everything that Blender has. We support cycles on GPU, CPU rendering with insanely fast servers, baking, all kinds of uploads you can imagine, all kinds of downloads you can imagine for the finished work, and a Blender plugin. So basically, we do rendering for everything you need.
Hi, my name is James Kennedy. I'm the CEO of Rendicity, and I think we're kind of following the trail that Marius is blazing to some extent with Blender. We're a cloud rendering solution, but we're not exclusively a Blender solution. So I'm actually really interested in this talk today because we came into this from a purely commercial basis, dealing with commercial studios using commercial software. And they had the rendering problem, and we were saying, why don't they use Rebus? This was a couple of years ago. Why don't they use Rebus Farm or third-party render farms? And the big issue that they had was the privacy of the data, that they don't want to share data with people. So we built Rendicity to come at the problem from that angle. So we've a slightly different architecture to basically that when you're rendering with the cloud, you don't have to give us your scene. That's the key to it. So having come from the commercial studios that were using the typically Autodesk software, I'd be really interested in seeing from this where everyone would envisage Blender being in maybe 5 years' time in terms of commercial usage.
Okay. My first question would be, if you read the forums, there's a lot of people, vocal people, who think that everything related to Blender should be free. So everybody who's doing some business or services, they're evil and they have to be banned or kicked or whatever. So do you notice this kind of stuff? Is that vocal? Is that a problem? Or is it really like a tiny minority only?
The sound is very full. Speak louder.
Yeah, that's okay. I will hold it like this. Okay. So what is your experience with communicating with the Blender community to get a service sold? Can you say something about that? Is there a community you talk to, or do you have a specific channel? Do you only talk to professionals? You stay away from Blender artists, or how do you handle this?
Well, I'll start. So I would say we're definitely very aware of this mentality that since it's open source, everything has to be free. Personally, I will definitely say that this is a mentality that I don't agree with, and I've kind of been fighting for about my entire professional career. I definitely see it spoken out on places like Blender Artist and in the comments of Blender Nation probably more than anywhere else. And I think honestly even though I don't think it's much of a problem, I think it's generally a very vocal minority. And I think it's something that a lot of the open source communities have kind of already gone through, and Blender, we're just now going through it. A perfect example is like the WordPress theming and plugin world, which is where my brother's at, went through the exact same basically debate and kind of culture shift as far as their view on open source in commercial services a few years ago. And I guess the way that I kind of approach it is open source is kind of about not restricting people. It's not necessarily about offering things for free. That just kind of tends to be a great advantage to it. And so if we can develop things that pay the people to develop them such that they can keep their lights on, they can eat, do whatever, and push the development further while also offering a service or a tool or whatever it may be in such a way that's not restrictive so other people can take advantage of the time that we've put into the development, grow that development further, and kind of do what they want to do with it. That's really kind of why we do it as open source. It's not just that it's free, although that's a great advantage. It's the openness. It's your freedom to do what you want to do with it.
Well, I think what we should do is try to make a segmentation of our user base. I mean, there are, in our view, two important groups of people. There are the Blender professionals, which are making a living out of Blender, one way or the other, either freelancers or working in a company. And there are enthusiasts who are using Blender for their own purposes, and maybe not even making money out of it. So the first group of people, at least speaking from our experience, never requested anything for free. So they are aware that this is a service that we offer, and it costs resources. I mean, the price of a single server is in the range of thousands of euros. And so they are using, I don't know, 100, 150 servers, and they cost money. So they are aware of this, and they are willing to pay to do this. From the other side, from the enthusiast side, there are some voices that are thinking that at least part of the service should be free. So we did get requests like this, not very many, but we did. And we didn't want to offer a free service. They said, well, you can offer it for free, but maybe render it in the spare time of the servers or something like that, or at a lower speed or anything. But we felt that this would mean, I don't know, give the users a false impression, a worse impression of our service than the service really is. So we didn't do that.
It's pretty similar to us, although we haven't done that much marketing. We haven't had anyone really sort of demanding that the service should be free. Like we act as an intermediary between cloud service providers. Like at the moment, it's just Amazon. So if we're doing anything at all, we don't have spare time. If we're doing anything at all, we're paying Amazon for a machine, just to switch it on. So I think people are aware straight away that there is a direct cost to us, that it's not like a lot of people contribute to an open source project with their time. So it'll be their spare time, but for something like a rendering service, there's an actual definite resource cost. And I think people appreciate that. But I also think, like cloud itself is, we talk to people, we're a cloud company. I don't think there's ever a case where one tool solves all of your problems or one approach is the perfect approach for every situation. So if you talk about free rendering, like for the alternative to ourselves and Marius would be like renderfarm.fi. So you've got an open solution there. where people do have spare computing power that they can volunteer to each other. So we haven't hit that demand at all, not directly anyway. But I think most people are aware that there's sort of, it's a case of choosing the appropriate tool for the problem.
Can you say anything like an advice for Blender.org or Blender Foundation, what we could do? Should we treat the professional community more special? Is that the Blender network? Is that working for you? Or would you see something else? Okay. Still not? Oh, good to hear this? Okay. So is there anything you guys would advise Blender.org or the Blender Foundation to help you with or to facilitate things? Or should we separate the community somehow? Or should we develop Blender Network more prominently? Would that help, or is that not relevant for your business?
I'll say that I think the Blender Network is in a great direction and really, really helpful. Because one of the, I think for me, running a largely Blender-based company that, we're based largely around open source software, but we are also a company, and so I need to pay my employees and things like that. One of the things that is challenging is of course just finding the people that are capable enough to do whatever the job is within Blender, and they're absolutely out there. And the Blender Network really kind of solves that problem. And that applies to whether you need a developer, whether you need an artist, whether you need a teacher. I think that really helps on the professional side, particularly when it comes to finding people. Is that kind of what you're asking, or?
Well, to answer directly to the first part of the question, I don't think we should separate the community. I think the community is great as it is. It's a great resource for all of us, and it should be helped to develop itself and not try to segment it in any way. As for what help could the foundation do, I'm going to the technical side right now. So what we would appreciate, for instance, would be access to technical support, or, for instance, there are cases when Blender just crashes. We've experienced that, and in those cases, it would help to have access to some guys to tell us what went wrong, and also a way to submit bug reports privately, because they may involve the client's work, and we cannot make that publicly. So those would be some things to help. And other than that, just keep developing Blender. It's a great tool, and I think that it will kick ass and take names in a couple of years. So.
I forgot to mention that we also had a proposal on the developer list to allow commercial service add-ons to be added to Blender. If it would fulfill a number of requirements, and as payment to become a sponsor for the development fund. Did you look at that opportunity? Because you could have a Render Street or Rendicity add-on in Blender if you would like to.
Yeah, I think we both love that.
You didn't know this proposal? Or
it
was not very public, it was only discussed on the developers list.
Yeah. No, I wasn't aware. I think that would help, but one question I would have in terms of if you're looking to engage more commercial users of Blender, one thing I saw from actually at the same FMX that there 2 years ago was most of the commercial studios that I spoke to were using Maya, but a big issue, and there was actually another panel discussion about this, was that it was really hard, even for two studios that use Maya, to collaborate with each other because everybody had their own Maya. Because most of the commercial studios developed their own in-house proprietary plugins, and they didn't want to share that with other studios. And we see that with studios that we work with a lot. So I was just wondering, have you thought about that from the point of view of the GPL licensing and everything, that if studios are writing their own proprietary in-house stuff. I know as long as they don't distribute it, they're not under the GPL. But the I guess actually where I'm coming from, sorry, is the collaboration side of it. That we see it being a standard.
If you have clients that have questions about the complexity of GPL, I mean, I'm always there via email to help or assist. Because a lot of things is possible. GPL is not that evil as people might think. So if your clients make, for example, a special Blender add-on with just some file input and output and they want to run it on your farm, no problem with that. Because the only thing is that if you get that stuff, you have the right to release it as GPL. That's what the deal is. And you say, no, I'm not going to do that. I mean, that you can keep that privately between you guys, no problem with that. The moment you start distributing it to the audience, of course, it has to become GPL. But for as long as it's a private business, you can do together what you want. That's literal freedom. So you can tell your clients, for as long as it is our relationship, it is 100% private. So, anyone in the audience having questions?
Hi. My question is, hello. Is it working? Cool. Okay, closer. Cool. I guess it's a fairly general one. How do you go about pricing your product?
Yeah, how expensive is
It's I'm taking the first
who's making
hit
the best
here.
offer?
So, yeah, it's I consult a witch lady, and she tells me. No, I'm kidding. Well, of course, for us that have actual operating costs related to each of the renders, the operating costs are an important part of the cost that we pass on to the user. So that's the main thing. And as for the psychological pricing, we don't care much about that. So we just try to give out some honest pricing.
Yeah, I guess on the CG Cookie side, it's kind of two-sided. So like on the citizen subscription, the tutorial subscription service we run, we actually changed the price recently from $10 a month to $18 a month because originally it's based largely on operating cost, where at the $10 mark, basically we were just about breaking even or kind of just barely breaking even as far as, once you start taking into account video hosting, bandwidth, et cetera, we hit the point where our operating costs were such that we couldn't push it any further. So if we wanted to just let it stay stagnant, we could. But then if we wanted to push it any further, like bring on more authors, improve the site, et cetera, we had to go and raise it. So we raised it to the now 18. And so that pricing is, largely considered, into operating costs within just a small margin to basically allow improvements. On the add-on side, so the add-on that we sell, which is $35, really there's no science behind it. It's mostly, looking at other tools that do similar things, plus looking at just Blender itself being free and open source, and then, thinking about the time involved where, the whole reason that it's even being sold is purely to fund the development of it. Where like Patrick Moore, the developer, has spent I don't even know how many hours doing it. So the goal is to not only pay him for the time that he's put in, but also to pay for additional development so we can push it a lot further. And so, the pricing it's a best guess essentially on all the contributing factors. So, like if we wanted to develop it this much further, how much additional money are we going to need for that? So what is a reasonable price based on what we think will sell? If you think you're only going to sell 100 copies of a tool, you're going to need to price it a lot higher than if you are selling 1,000 copies. And, the only thing, in this case, the only thing that you can really look at is, your past experiences of, have you ever sold a tool before? How many did it sell? How many people are buying tools within the Blender world, or how many people are paying for rendering services and that kind of stuff. So it's kind of a mixture of all facets involved.
I'll give the brutal capitalist answer. If it generally comes down to either you're going to price something on a cost plus basis, which is is quite limiting, and it's going to, it can often constrain your growth as a company. So if you're building a commercial company that you're trying to grow all the time, that's an issue there. So with software, because even building a service such as ours, we've ongoing costs, but really the big cost is an upfront cost with software, that you put in all your costs developing it to write the product. But then for every person that you sell it to, there's really no extra cost. There's no real per unit cost, barring maybe sales. So what you hope it will come down to is the value to the customer, that so you find the price that the customer thinks is fair for the value that they're receiving, and that's really the magic of it. And then you're trying to balance your operating costs, like current versus fixed costs, and so on. But that's the way we go about it. So unfortunately, we're on the cost plus model at the moment. So.
Do any of you have any thoughts on framework within which add-ons or assets could be sold, kind of, and supported? Something that the Blender Foundation might be able to think about, or some sort of way of distributing this sort of content?
Can I just jump in there? I was actually wondering that about Media Goblin, as a possible mechanism for that. I think, like, if you're talking about selling the content itself, the assets themselves, I don't see anything. I don't see how that's different from Ben Simon's writing a book, how to learn Blender. So.
Maybe I can actually just ask a clarifying question. When you say a framework, are you talking about basically a framework for distributing your add-on? So like if you write an add-on but don't have, say, like a place to sell it, is that kind of what you're looking for, or? Okay, yeah, so you're basically looking for a distribution framework. I think something like that would be fantastic. It's something that I've kind of looked at, honestly. I am not developing it, but I've talked with a guy that is doing it, that has the experience to do it, and I think he's hoping to release something fairly soon. So there's stuff in the works. I don't know how much he wants to share, so I won't share any details. But yeah, I think that there will be stuff like that soon. Of course, you can always do it personally. But of course, having a network like, the Envato marketplaces are a great example, where like there's themeforest.net, there's 3D Ocean, and a whole bunch of others, where they're networks where people can go to and sell stuff without having to try and build up a traffic basis themselves, because you want to put your time into your tool, not necessarily a nice website to sell it. So.
At the Blender Institute, we get regularly requests for development support. Like what you said, like priority bug fixing, or there were companies who wanted to have some cycles fixed, or FBX updates. So we're doing some work, and sometimes I can't even talk about it because they don't want me to talk about it. So that's typical commercial business. So for me, as Blender Institute, this is not my model. I don't want to become a development support company. And I find it still quite difficult to find either freelancers or to find small companies who say, sure, hire us, we are available to do development support for Blender professionals. Because that's actually what Jonathan did too. It was actually almost like a support product, because you needed specific stuff in an add-on. You should be able to hire anyone for that. So what is this bottleneck thing? Because there are really loads and loads of developers who would like to make money, right? Where are they? Are they here? Show the hand. So where is the problem? Why are there no clients then?
From time to time, I do get jobs. People willing to have something fixed that would take me 6 months to get back at that, some DOM stuff. It's okay, gonna take me 5 hours, that hour rate, and they don't mind. It happens.
We get a lot of requests for new features, but those are most likely large features, and they get stuck. And small features, well, no, it's for us. It's not there's not enough questions for getting it really going.
So it's still a little bit the chicken egg issue, right? So there's still not enough studios and professionals with big pockets, and so that's why there are not enough people who are available to get hired. So that's definitely a good strategy to continue, right? To make sure we develop this infrastructure of support, services, and demand.
Yeah, I mean, I'll chime in just real quick. I think I think what you just hit on as far as there's not enough people looking to hire developers for there to be, I guess, more demand and more developers actually like putting themselves out there. I know that, I hired Patrick Moore, the guy that to do the Contours retopology tool. He's not a developer full time. He's actually in dental school, and just happens to be a really awesome developer. And I got referred to him by somebody else, but had I not been referred to him, I never would have contacted him because I didn't really know who he was, and I don't think he's on the network. I know that the network kind of solves that problem if you are looking to hire somebody, to go to the network, so long as you kind of know who they are or what you're looking for. I do think that maybe one of the problems for hiring people is when the employer, say such as myself, doesn't know necessarily the technical requirements for what they want to build. They just know what they want to build. So for me, I wanted a retopology tool. I don't necessarily know a lot of the requirements that go into actually building something like that. So a lot of times, I wouldn't have known who to actually talk to from a development standpoint, because obviously, there's a lot of different developers, whether you're UI, whether you're modeling, whether you're physics. And so knowing, what kind of developer to talk to is probably a bit of an issue to a lot of people. I know for me, just I have the advantage that I know a lot of the developers, and so I just call Ton and say, hey, Ton, who knows how to do this? But I don't think a lot of people do know that.
No, the Blender network is also having an open consultancy email address. Mail them, and they will tell you or try to find you somebody. I mean, the same issue which is striking. I mean, I've been in contact with the studios where they are making film or TV series. And countries like Argentina, in Indonesia, many studios already, in India, studios making a film, they don't have developers. And I say, why don't you guys add a little budget or something, or try to get local developers on board to do things? That's still not in their mindset. But mostly they come from a Maya or Max or commercial software background, and they have been more or less forced to use Blender simply because of a cost issue. Legal issue, because Autodesk is very aggressively visiting studios and say, hey, you guys have to pay. So using Blender is for them a cost topic and still not a topic of quality. Like, I can get developers on board, and with a little bit of development, I can make things twice as good. So maybe people don't get that mindset yet.
Well, I know that the current Blender Foundation team is quite small, and I hope it will grow in time, and I see that you are taking steps towards that. And regarding to what you mentioned, the example with the Indian studios, I think there might not be an issue of money. There might be an issue of need or the knowing that there are developers they can use. I mean,
I know, but probably Jonathan has this experience now too. So talking to a developer who actually understands you and makes something awesome is magic, right? That's awesome.
It's awesome.
But you have to understand that.
Right. Well, I wonder too. In the case of the studio that you mentioned in India, I wonder if it's an experience question, not a technical experience, but if you have people like that are accustomed to working with commercial software, they don't have the option generally to customize whatever they want, except for in the form of, say, a plugin. So I wonder if it's merely, an experience from a mentality standpoint of maybe a lot of people don't really realize the benefit to being able to hire a developer, to the fact that, I know that, like, you know, when I started out in Blender, the idea of being able to hire somebody to make custom changes to me never even crossed my mind, because, you know, I was just accustomed to using what was available in the tool. And I wonder if there's a way that we can promote that better within, you know, the Blender Foundation and just the community in general, that, you know, basically along the lines of, hey, if you have work and you need, you know, additional customizations or whatnot, there are developers out there that are, you know, looking for work and available. If you have, you know, if you have funds, you've got time. And I think that a lot of people maybe just don't, you know, particularly on the artistic side, just to pick on ourselves for a moment, don't understand the value a developer brings to a team, you know, because I think maybe in a lot of eyes, you know, perhaps this probably more on the art side, you know, they're not seeing content being produced. And so sometimes it's hard to equate value to that, but suddenly, you know, when you realize how much value they really add.
Every artist should have his own developer. That's the target.
That would be awesome.
And everybody who's been working in Blender Institute will understand why, right? Where are they? They're all back at work.
If I can chip in for a moment, I believe that what he's saying is absolutely correct. I mean, I've worked with media agencies, and they don't even dream of hiring a developer. So it's the thought has never crossed their mind. So if you want to do this, if you want to take this road, you would have to take initiative and advertise this somehow.
Sorry, can I just add to that as well? Like generally, again, coming back to commercial studios adopting Blender, in software generally, big companies won't use an open source project unless there's some kind of commercial technical support available. Not even for customizing or anything like that, just that they know if they're on a deadline and something goes wrong, that there's people that they can call to help them. So going back to your previous question, if something like that was available, that you know, I think that would certainly help to increase adoption then as well.
I don't know if it's wrong to say, but if there was perhaps something in the help menu, there was a pull down that would say submit an RFQ or request commercial support, it would then go to a list on the foundation page that people subscribe to. It's a pay-per-click. If you click on an RFQ, you're paying the foundation a referral fee. Hence, you get the commercial client that has a real issue or can expand on more detail. And you may or may not be the only exclusive one. Maybe it's you know, competition of 10 or whatever the depth is that the client may want to put. But I think on the help menu would be ideal and very organic. And then it would the foundation would, you know, get I think a reasonable referral fee, and then someone who's interested in responding to an RFQ would then have that option to help commercial support. Other than that, a website, but I think in the application is perfectly viable to put in the help menu.
If I could just jump in, I think what a lot of people would really want is not that they could kind of do that with Stack Overflow, you know, like the Blender and Stack Overflow. But I think what's if it's not needed now, it's definitely going to be needed, is that technical support, that there's a phone number that people can call and just immediately get a direct response. I think that's.
I would have thought to that. I think that I know that, you know, one of the kind of challenges in the past, you know, particularly with talking to you, is, you know, the foundation can't really, you know, you kind of have to be unbiased. You can't like have, you know, let's just say CG Cookie come in and offer, you know, official support for Blender, because then that would be showing us bias. But I think something that would be very, very valuable is very similar to the Blender Development Fund, where basically it, you know, either from the same fund or a support fund or something like that, to have a couple of foundation hired support agents basically that are there to answer questions. So for example, like you were saying, you know, just from the Blender help menu would be ideal, or you may not want to make it that accessible, or suddenly you get thousands and thousands of questions, but somewhere where commercial companies in particular that have a vested interest in getting support, a true vested interest financially, have an area that they know is accessible and that it's also basically certified by the foundation. Because I think one of the things people run into a lot is they simply don't know where to go. And since there's nowhere like, on necessarily like on blender.org that where they can explicitly get support from blender.org as far as they're concerned, they're under the impression that it simply doesn't exist. We have links to like community support sites underneath. I think it's under support and then like community support or something like that. And I don't think people dig that far. I think that, basically they realize that there's not support and then they leave in many cases. Because I hear that a lot as well, particularly talking to people at SIGGRAPH, a really common question is, how do I get support for Blender? And I mean, really in short, you find somebody that knows Blender, you pay them for time. But I think that having something like that for the foundation would be great.
I think it's running already. Yeah.
I think it is kind of running. There's a new Blender support site that Sebastian and Francesco and a few others are working on that is mostly active, but is it active? Okay, blendersupport.com. Hopefully that's okay to announce. Blendersupport.com. So, but I just think that something like that, whether it's blendersupport.com or something else, basically needs to be endorsed by the foundation in a way where you're not necessarily endorsing a specific business or a specific individual, but endorsing a channel for support, I think would be really valuable. Well, we have certified trainers.
Okay, so just a couple of questions. So how fast is your business growing, and is it growing fast enough? And then going back to the kind of the original question, do you think that, the question that do Blender users want to pay for services and so forth? Like, do you think that, let's say that in the future Blender captures market from Autodesk, for example, do you think that as big of a part of Blender users are actually willing to then pay for those services than for example, existing Autodesk users? I'm just I'm interested in it. I think it's a funny topic. It's an ongoing topic also for me, coming from renderfarm.fi also for a long time and kind of trying to see the market and where it's going and so forth. So what do you think?
Well, how fast is the business? Is the business growing fast enough? That's a very relative term. It is growing, and we hope to be growing even more as the community develops more and more. And because it's my belief that more and more users will come to Blender. I cannot speak about the Blender users taking Blender taking the market share for other 3D programs. Well, it's not my place to do that. But I think the community will continue developing, and well, I hope that we will be developing with it as well.
Since we support a lot of programs, and most of we have a Rendicity plugin for each application, including the Autodesk ones. And the development of those plugins usually ends up landing on me, so I end up using them all. And I kind of came back to Blender. I initially looked at Blender maybe 3 years ago, when I was first looking at doing a different business. And then we came back to it towards the end of last year, and like the pace of development was massive, and I couldn't really see a whole lot that any other software packages really had over Blender. So I think it certainly, if you do the right things, it's only a matter of time before more commercial studios are using it, and that is what we are targeting. Like we saw that there was. For enthusiasts in that, there's a lot of rendering options out there, and we were coming at it from the data privacy angle, and which is really only a commercial concern, for the commercial studios that are bound by their clients and so on. But I mean, we wouldn't be here if we didn't think that there was going to be, plenty of business in that in the future. Our own company is growing in that we only really launched it about 2 months ago. So we've had, I don't know how many thousands of % growth, but we're still kind of finding our feet with it. From using all the applications, like to us, they boil down to being just different GUIs to basically the same kind of data structures underneath, being fed into render engines. I think from what Tom was saying about the other commercial render engines approaching you, I think they realize that as well, that there's everything there in the interface for the artist actually building the scene and the content to be able to express, an Arnold scene or a V-Ray scene or probably a mental ray scene, as well as cycles and the internal renderers. So I think the question is, do you really want, the commercial companies using Blender? Like, would you, as a community, what would it look like if Blender was the dominant tool in the market in 5 years' time? How would that affect things? Do you want that to happen? And we've talked about the things that we think needs to be there for that to happen. But I think there's certainly the opportunity there. Yeah.
Just following. Sorry, Jonathan, are you going to?
I'll just chime in on Julius's question real quick. On your first question, basically on whether the business is growing, yes and yes. We've seen approximately 200% growth, or doubled since January. And if you go back, basically every single year, it's been the same. So I think it's basically doubling every year. From just subscriber counts alone, it's, I think, tripled since this time last year. So it's growing very quickly, and I think that there's a lot of people in the Blender community that are interested in paying for basically, whether it's a quality product, quality support, whatever it is. There's a lot of people that have a vested interest both in learning Blender, in using Blender, in pushing Blender further, and so I think that there's a lot of demand for that, and I think that demand is increasing very, very quickly. I mean, the Blender community, even though it feels very small and friendly, it's quite large. As far as well, I guess I just answered both those, didn't I? I think that was it. So, yeah, go for it.
Thank you. You've mentioned that support is potentially a reason why more commercial organisations don't use Blender. And taking the UI question completely out, what are the other things that you think are stopping Blender from being adopted by larger VFX houses and smaller production houses?
Any that I've spoken to, and I end up kind of asking them that, have they looked at Blender recently and what have you, and there's generally a kind of a dismissive attitude that it's something just for hobbyists, that they don't, there's a kind of an ignorance that they don't realize how far Blender has come as an actual mature tool for content. So I think that awareness is probably the biggest thing, more than anything else. I think if that awareness was there, there'd be lots of users, therefore the demand for technical support would cause people to form tech support companies for Blender and so on. So I think there's a general, people don't really believe that they can do their feature films in it. So maybe the open movies is the best way to keep addressing that.
I think that in the 3D modeling market has significant inertia. I mean, when a 3D artist learns a program, there's a steep learning curve, and he has to invest a lot of time in mastering that program. So if he needs to switch to another program, then he has to basically start over, because everything is different. So Blender, let's say 2 years ago, Blender was not what it is now. The Blender right now is a very advanced tool compared to what it was 2 years ago. And correct me if I'm wrong. So I think that in order for more companies to adopt Blender, well, firstly, I think the way is to go to the companies through the artists. So to reach for the artists first, and they will push it upwards to the companies. And then I think it just needs time and a little push by the foundation, my opinion.
I'll just put in just one other thought. I completely agree with what both of these guys have said. But I think another thing that is, if you take an established studio, they have no reason to switch to Blender because, you know, let's just say if it's an established studio, let's assume that it's been around 5-10 years. They put a lot of money and a lot of time into building the pipeline that they have, you know, whether that's Max, XSI, Maya, it really doesn't matter what it is. It could be completely proprietary. So when you have a pipeline that's working, why would you switch? Now, if something breaks, so like, say, like Autodesk moving into a completely subscriber system, that may push a lot of the smaller studios to something else because that's going to be then, you know, recurring license cost. Whereas in the past, if you have a single license, you've already paid for it, you've got your artists working, you're productive, you don't want to take time away to have everyone relearn an entire system and suddenly lose all productivity for a short time. So there's really not an incentive to switch at that point. But I think that you kind of have to flip the question on its head and ask, what's stopping new studios from adopting it? And frankly, I don't think there is really anything. I think that there's tons of new studios adopting it. You know, you look at like the studio behind Naughty 5 and the other feature films. Those are classic examples of new studios with new people that basically have the opportunity to start fresh. And when you're starting fresh, you've got a lot more options on what you can go with.
Okay. I would like to wrap it up.
What they found, the biggest problem is about how can I rely on it? How can I have an exact result from something I'm expecting this way?
I think it's a bit of an education issue for like educating people not only of course on how to use Blender, but also, you know, educating like supervisors and studio leads and things like that on how they can integrate Blender and, you know, what kinds of costs are they going to be looking at. Are the majority of costs going to be purely time in learning it? Are the majority of costs going to be time in getting support to integrate within their pipeline and their needs? I think it's, you know, I don't know that there's an easy answer to that, but I think that absolutely it's very, very doable, and mostly, you know, the people that are making the decisions just need to be open-minded to trying new things and not just necessarily going with what they know will work based on what other people have done. And I do think that a lot of studios do tend to be a bit closed-minded towards that. Now, obviously, they're closed-minded for good reason because you're talking about a lot of money at hand. But I think that if you're open-minded about it, there's absolutely good solutions to it, and it's mostly a matter of educating, you know, in this case it'd be, you know, yourself, whether you're the studio lead or whatever. So, yeah.
A matter of time.
Definitely
So
time.
we have to stop. I think it's almost 7 o'clock. I think it's late enough. Time to have a little bit of relaxation, or a drink, or a beer, or food. And at 7:30 there's the first screening here of the Susanna nominations and Susanna Festival, and the screening is being repeated at 9:30. So you can have food first and come back later, or watch the film at 9:30. I thank the panel.